say more about them because I'd like to introduce you, Hayley, and to invite you to address the meeting. And the title is The Role That Wales Plays in Peace and Peacebuilding.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Robin. Many thanks for the invitation to speak to everybody this evening. I imagine that there are a number of things that I will talk about that you know very well, and so would definitely invite some discussion afterwards to be able then to learn more. So as Robin said, I'm Hayley, and fortunate to be the Chief Executive currently at Cymru Global. We used to be called the Welsh Centre for International Affairs, and we changed our name in March this year, following quite a lot of consultation, and we are still based at the Temple of Peace, and I'm in the council chamber of the Temple of Peace with our wonderful archive behind us. So I have my notes next to me, so I will be kind of, looking away at times. So please forgive me for that as well. So I've been exploring as part of a master's that I'm undertaking, the role that Wales has played, does play, and can play in the future in terms of peace and peace building. And as Robin said in the introduction, I worked for a number of years in conflict. And so to be able to come home and see that there was a temple of peace that existed here and such a strong peace movement, with long, a long history behind it, really meant something very special to me. So I thought it was important to look at, the different ways that we have, worked on peace, and where that starts. So when we talk about the past, and we can go really far back into the past, obviously, I won't go very, very far back, but we'll then look over the 20th and the 21st century, and kind of start it from there. And just to really kind of frame it from, I suppose, World War One onwards, and looking then at the movements that came out of Wales and just, the endeavours that had started in Wales kind of, back in the 1920s. So, like many countries in the world, Wales was evidently reeling from the World War One. And these endeavours for peace, started here, but really reached out into the world. And so, with this history of connecting with people around the world, we saw the first chair of international relations at Aberystwyth University, the start of the Welsh League of Nations Union, which developed then into the United Nations Association of Wales, and the origins of the WCIA, now Cymru Global. And a number of people figured in those moments, the Reverend Gwilym Davies, David Davies, Winifred Cwm-Tennant, Annie Hughes-Griffiths, and they were really inspirational in terms of galvanizing the nation around these endeavours for peace. So through the 1920s, we saw the creation of the Welsh League of Nations Union, which became a huge success, really, with about 1,000 branches that were active across Wales, and 60,000 people who were members of that, actively campaigning across the country. In 1922, we saw the first Earth message of peace and goodwill. So for the children of Wales that went out into the world, and it continues to this day. And just under a month ago, on the 18th of May this year, was the most recent peace and goodwill message. So I'm sure, as many of you know, there's always been the children that have received messages back from the other children around the world. So creating that connection really from such a young age, focused on these endeavours for peace. We were very fortunate here in 2015 to discover the Women's Peace Petition. So the Hawlio Heddwch that was signed by 296,000 women in Wales across 1923 and 1924, which was quite a phenomenal thing to achieve, and I think it amounted to about a third of the women of Wales who were signing that, and women who went out in all kinds of winds and weathers to gather those signatures in order to appeal to the government of the United States to join the League of Nations, as it was at the time, believing that this would be the way of building sustainable peace. So that petition now is online, and I imagine many people have looked at it. If you haven't, it's really interesting. I've found my great grandmothers and my great aunts on there who signed it, and it's quite a moment to be able to see their signatures there and have that connection. You know, that they, you know, following the war, really wanted to work towards peace, and they were able to sign that. In 1926, the women continued and had the Peacemakers' Pilgrimage, which was a march from North and South Wales, and joined many people who were coming from across the UK with a banner of law, not war. So, you know, really kind of looking towards building, you know, international law and being behind that in order to be able to create the peace that they really longed to see. Following that, about 18 months after the Women's Peace Petition, the leaders of religion in Wales also came together. So we can see there's a real concerted effort, you know, across the board to work towards it. You know, leaders of religion, women, children, you know, really kind of focused on this. And they called then for the support of churches across the United States, also to advocate for the League of Nations. And this was a memorial from the leaders of religious bodies in Wales to the Federal Churches of Christ in America. As we moved through, there were so many endeavours around education in the 1920s. The Aberystwyth hosted the League of Nations International Peace Congress, so, you know, really reaching out and bringing people to Wales as well at that time. And, you know, the huge amount of work that was being done at the League of Nations Union. On to the end of the 20s, and David Davis really believed, after being on the front lines of the First World War, you know, that there was a better way to be, and that us being able to come together and have these conversations around peace and really to be able to work together, that we could do that in a place. And so the idea of the Temple of Peace was born, and Percy Thomas was then commissioned at the end of the 1920s and into the 1930s to build the Temple of Peace, which I definitely have the privilege of working in today. And I imagine many people have visited, but if you haven't, please, we have temple tours that you can come and look really at the history of peace in Wales over the 20th century as well. So the Temple of Peace, the foundation stone was laid, and the temple opened its doors in 1938. Often we see that as, you know, is that a moment that, you know, a year before war broke out, does that feel like something that, you know, can kind of set us back? But in fact, people continued to work towards towards peace and towards sustainable peace and connection and conversation, even though, you know, the war had started. From that, then, post-war, obviously, we had the United Nations that replaced the League of Nations, which, as we're on the call then of the United Nations Association, we can still see that that is something that is here and that we work towards as well. And I found it really interesting, having lived outside of Wales for quite a long time, before coming home in 2018, just to see that the amount of Welsh people that were involved, within the creation of the United Nations, and the institutions around that, and the forming of UNESCO, and the Charter of the United Nations, and interestingly, that the UN Charter in 1945 was signed by Lord Halifax, who also laid the foundation stone at the Temple of Peace. So there's a real, connection that exists there between Wales and what we're doing, with that wider work. So, that was continued to be built on then, throughout the rest of the 20th century, and the push towards how we work together, how we look at education. So then, before, as part of the movement of the 1920s, there was a lot around global education, and kind of based on the principles of the League of Nations. And Wales really adopted those principles, building them into the curriculum, and then working towards that. And for us at Cymru Global, global learning is a really big part of the work that we do, also around global citizenship. How do we come together? How do we talk to each other? How can we create then societies that are listening to each other and want to learn, but also then are curious about what is happening elsewhere, and what our impact is on that. And we work alongside many other organisations across Wales, who are also, very much focused on that. And as we know, there is a very strong peace movement that exists still within Wales. So towards then the 1950s, there was a very strong campaign for nuclear disarmament, which sadly we know is an ongoing campaign. And in 1983, we had then the march of the women from West Wales coming through then Cardiff onwards through Newport, to Greenham Common. And what then began as the idea of Am Petit really grew into this huge movement, that I'm sure, we all know very well, of the 19 years that were spent at Greenham Common, with thousands of people, became involved in protesting at the site in Berkshire. So for me also I knew about Greenham Common, I knew what had happened, and I was very young at the time, and so to learn more about that and to see how that had built up, from Wales. I always took Wales with me wherever I went, and I would always talk about it and draw a map. This is Wales, this is what we do. It's a small country, and people would ask, well, what's its origins, what is it, and what's its link to the UK, and what's its link to Britain, what's its link to England. And to be able to come and see that so much had happened and so much was happening in Wales, such a small country, but such a big impact, was just wonderful. And it's always just allowed me to kind of go out and talk even more about what we do and what we can give. And so as I was, reading through and looking at, what more happened, throughout the 20th century. And I found about the Freedom from Hunger campaign in 1960, and found that the campaign itself moved the headquarters from London to here, recognizing that there was just so much happening in Wales, and so much kind of backing for that, and that it supported 57 projects across 30 countries, and had, funded big charities such as that we know now, such as Oxfam and Save the Children. It was wonderful when I joined the call, and saw Robert, because based here at the Temple of Peace, which, if you haven't come, please come, was the establishment of the Peace Garden. So we have the National Garden of Peace, based here at the Temple of Peace, and that then was born to be able to commemorate different community groups, different difficult things that had happened around the world, but that people would be able to come and to remember, and to sit, and to be in community, with people within the garden, and we continue. From the 1980s up to now, to have new memorials for people to come and ask if it's possible then, to have their memorial at the Temple of Peace. And last year, we marked 80 years, of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by planting the ginkgo tree, in the garden. So it continues, and people come and join, and we also have then, a friends group where people come and they maintain the garden, as an act of, of peace and of coming together. And so what I could see from, from the history, that there's obviously, so much, that has happened, across the years, and that the peace movement, was and is extremely strong. And so looking at the present, and what is happening now, is that those endeavours continue in one form or another. Obviously for us then, the movement towards the Welsh Centre for International Affairs from the origins then, being at the Temple of Peace and the United Nations. And I started to look. We'd seen a lot of civil society, a lot of, kind of charities that were working towards it, a lot of people working towards it. And I wanted to look at this multi-level approach, to peace from Wales. What does that look like, from government, from public bodies, from charities, from the third sector, from civil society, from individuals who want to get involved in some way. What exists and what is possible. And I think a really big part of that, if we look, in terms of government work, is that we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and this is something that is rare, within the world. It's almost 11 years old, and it was. It has well-being goals based within it. It has, a push for cohesive communities, for people really to be able to come together. And, how does that create a Wales that it's thriving, that is healthy? And the team from the Future Generations Commission had spoken at the United Nations, as well, to be able to encourage other countries to launch, similar acts for themselves, which some countries have, and they're looking to Wales, as an example, of how that's been able to be put into place. And I believe there was a quote which was, "What Wales does today, the rest of the world will do tomorrow." And so within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, there is a global responsibility goal. And that then, in terms of how we're looking, from this concept of peace. I mean, we haven't even gone into what does peace mean, because it's such a huge concept anyway. It's about peace within yourself, how you interact in communities, how we look, within our nation, the wider UK, and then internationally on so many different layers. And the idea of then global responsibility, is being conscious of what am I doing that's having an impact on somebody else? How can I, or, in the case of the Act, obviously it's for public bodies, how are we being conscious of how Wales, is behaving internally, and what the impact is then externally? And to have that then, and for us to think about it, in terms of how we live, as citizens too, really kind of has that connection, that starts kind of with us and then goes outwards towards our communities, and into the world. So we work within the global responsibility area, and and constantly kind of, looking at, well, what is government investing in, when we're looking as well in terms of arms sales, of being responsible for the impact that you may have on civilians in other countries is extremely important. And then, within our peace movement, that is something that comes up very often, is to be able to look and and not be having, that negative impact on places around the world, whether it's socially, economically, and to be able then, as with all that we've seen in the past, putting civilians in the centre of this to ensure, that people have safety and security around them. So we do often kind of still touching on the role of the different layers of what we can do, is that we don't have foreign policy devolved to Wales. So in that sense, then it's we kind of look at, well, what is possible to do, So we did, in previous government, have the international strategy, and that then, kind of looks at how we're engaging internationally, and what the role that Wales can play on the international stage. Last year, I went to the International Eisteddfod at Llangollen. So, as we know, that, was created back in 1947. And so, so many decades of bringing people together, of bringing performers together, to be able then, to talk about, their different cultural experiences, promoting peace, and having that celebration of international friendship, of that unity, and there are over 4,000 performers, who come to that, and it includes the annual peace lecture, and the awarding of the Young Peacemakers Awards, which is a joy to be able to see what young people are doing in their communities, in peace and learning about peace as well. And as I'm sure many of you know, at the National Eisteddfod, we have the peace tent on the Maes, which is, it's we think a much loved annual fixture, within the programme, and is well visited, with talks that are held there as well. And so within that, we can see that, there is such a strength, such a movement for peace that's embedded a lot across all of our, a lot of our cultural institutions, that's within the way that we work within Wales, with the different strengths of the peace movement, both locally, nationally, and then working in global solidarity, outside of Wales as well, with a number of charities that are here, and a number of years ago, it was found, not too many years ago, but that Wales had a tendency to give, more money to charity than other nations of the United Kingdom. So that want to connect, that want to support, that want to donate is there, and I think that we can see that runs through the country. And so in terms then of kind of looking towards the future, and this is something that like I said, has come out of some research around international relations as well, is that what is possible. I think that we will kind of continue with the with what we do around peace, with this strong peace movement, and the solidarity that we have, and also then, looking at how Wales can interact, on the international stage. And so I started looking at a concept called paradiplomacy, which is small nations, who come together to be able to work. And in terms then of, not having a foreign policy as such, the paradiplomacy then gives space to small nations on every level to look at language, to look at culture, to look at our shared past. And we know that in Wales, language, is so important to us, and it was often looked at as an example of a country that was able then, to really, revive a language that was tried to kind of be pushed to the side. That we've been able to revive the Welsh language, and to bring that, into the bilingualism that we see with, across the country. And I'm always surprised by how much Welsh, I've picked up in different places, even though I'm a Welsh speaker, Welsh learner, dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, that it is then possible, for certain words that you pick up, or terms that we hear. Then so as part of our work, we host the Academy Heddwch Cymru, and this is Wales's first Peace Academy, and is the first Peace Academy within the United Kingdom, and there, along with peace education work, we then trying to bring out the research around peace, and what is possible around peace. And last year they released their Nation of Peace report. And so this is looking at Wales as a nation of peace. What can be done. We know that peace matters for Wales. We have a globally responsible nation, and it's looking then at, cooperation over conflict, partnership over rivalry, and within our own country, and then taking that internationally as well. And it's something then that can be adopted throughout the nation. It looks then at, what do we need in order to be able to be a nation of peace? How can we work towards that? How can we look at a concept called positive peace, which is around peace building, peacemaking rather than peacekeeping, so those active ways of engaging within peace, that then we can take out, and it builds on this legacy that I've spoken about, and that I know many of you are working in as well, and raises about power diplomacy as well, and that how this can be the links we can form with regional governments and other smaller nations across the world. So I can put that, I can share the Wales, the Nation of Peace report with everybody. If you would, be interested in receiving that, and then, how we can kind of move towards this nation of peace. So I will stop there for now, and would be keen, if you have any questions,